The bell above the shop door hadn't rung in over an hour. The dim interior of Reynolds' General Store felt more like a forgotten relic than the heart of a neighborhood. Dust floated lazily in the shafts of afternoon light that crept through the dirty windows. Mark Reynolds sat slouched behind the counter, a half-empty coffee mug beside him and a crumpled eviction notice in his hand. The store had been in his family for 2 generations, but the bills were piling up faster than customers were coming in. His savings were gone. His hope was hanging by a thread. He rubbed his tired eyes and stared at the rows of untouched shelves. Canned goods, cleaning supplies, cereal boxes, each one reminding him of better days that felt like a lifetime ago. Outside, gray clouds gathered, and the first drops of rain tapped softly against the glass. Mark looked up, drawn by a subtle movement across the street. There, hunched under a flickering street lamp, sat a man on the curb soaked from head to toe. He clutched a flimsy cardboard sign that read, "We'll work for food," his hands trembling in the cold. Passers-by walked around him, avoiding eye contact like he was invisible. Something about the man's eyes, tired but not defeated, caught Mark's attention. He found himself watching longer than he meant to. Maybe it was the silence in his shop. Maybe it was the shared weight of desperation. Whatever it was, Mark stood slowly, glanced once more at the eviction notice and tucked it away. He reached for his coat. The shop might be falling apart, but for the first time in days, Mark felt the pull of purpose. He stepped outside, into the rain, heading toward the man no one else seemed to see. Rain tapped gently against the brim of Mark's cap as he crossed the quiet street. The cold bit through his jacket, but he barely noticed, his eyes fixed on the man huddled beneath the street lamp. The cardboard sign trembled in the man's hands, more from cold than fear. His clothes were stained and worn thin, his beard untrimmed, but his eyes, those weary eyes, held a spark of life. Mark crouched down beside him, offering a steaming cup of coffee he'd brought from the store. The man looked at him in surprise, hesitation flickering before gratitude softened his expression. "Thanks," he muttered, wrapping both hands around the warm cup like it was treasure. Mark nodded. "Got a name?" "Daniel," he said after a pause. "Been rough lately." Mark looked down the road, then back at his own shop. The door was still open, flickering with dying light. The idea that had been sitting at the edge of his mind now took root. "Listen," he began, unsure of his own words. "I've got a store, barely hanging on to be honest. Can't offer much. But if you're willing to work, I could use a hand." Daniel blinked. His fingers gripped the coffee tighter. "You'd let me work?" "I can't promise anything long-term," Mark said quickly, almost embarrassed. "Just a few hours a day, stocking shelves, cleaning up, that kind of thing. I'll give you food, a little cash if there's any left at the end of the day." For a long moment, Daniel didn't speak. Then slowly he stood, coffee still in hand. "I'll do it," he said quietly but firmly. "Thank you. You won't regret it." Mark offered a nod and turned toward the shop, the 2 men walking, side by side, strangers brought together by desperation, stepping into something neither could quite name yet. The next morning, before the sun had even risen, Daniel was already outside the shop, waiting. Mark opened the door and was surprised to see him there, shivering slightly but standing tall, hands tucked into his threadbare coat. Without a word, Daniel followed him inside. The air inside was still stale, but something felt different. Maybe it was the quiet shuffle of hope that came with the man's presence. Mark handed Daniel a broom and pointed toward the back. "Start there. Sweep, restock if you see any gaps. I'll be up front." Daniel nodded, got to work immediately. No complaints, no questions. His movements were slow but careful, like someone trying to rebuild not just a space but himself. Hours passed. The shop began to feel alive. Dust disappeared from corners that had been ignored for months. Shelves were straightened. Even the windows were wiped clean. By midday, a few regular customers peeked in and noticed the difference. One of them even complimented the clean floors, something Mark couldn't remember hearing in years. Then came a small but telling moment. A young boy, maybe 10, wandered in, nervously glancing around. He reached out and quickly slipped a loaf of bread into his coat. Before Mark could say a word, Daniel was already there, calm, gentle. He crouched beside the boy, pulled out a sandwich from the back counter, one he'd set aside for himself, and offered it to him. "You don't need to steal, kid," he said softly. "Just ask next time." The boy looked at him, then at Mark, and slowly nodded, taking the sandwich with trembling hands before running out. Mark stood frozen, watching it all unfold. Daniel hadn't done it to be noticed. He didn't even look back. And in that quiet act of kindness, Mark saw a glimpse of something he hadn't felt in years: dignity, humanity, hope. That night, long after the shop had closed and the streets emptied, Mark stayed behind to balance the books. It wasn't good. Bills still loomed large, but for the first time in months, the numbers weren't worse. He leaned back in his chair, exhausted but oddly at peace. As he turned off the lights and locked the register, he noticed a dim silhouette sitting just outside the shop door. It was Daniel resting against the wall, a crumpled piece of paper in his hand. Mark stepped out into the cool night air. "You okay?" he asked gently. Daniel startled, quickly wiping his eyes and folding the paper away. Yeah, just reading something." Mark didn't press but sat beside him. After a long silence, Daniel spoke, his voice low and shaky. "It's from my daughter. She lives in Ohio. I haven't seen her since she was 9. Mark stayed, quiet, listening. "I used to have a job, a house, a family, then I lost it all. Drinking, bad choices. I ended up on the streets, too ashamed to go back. I wrote her a letter months ago just in case, didn't think she'd reply." He unfolded the paper, hands trembling. "She said she misses me. She's older now, works nights. Said if I ever find my way there, she'd like to talk." His voice cracked and he looked away. "I don't know if I deserve that." Mark felt the ache in his chest, the weight of Daniel's truth settling deep. He stood, walked back inside, and returned with a white envelope. Inside were 2 bus tickets and a folded letter with the shop's letterhead. "I think you do," Mark said. "It's time to go home." Daniel stared at the envelope, speechless. His eyes welled up, and for a long moment he simply held it against his chest, as if afraid it might vanish. The weeks passed, and spring began to touch the town, with light. Reynolds' General Store had changed. The once dusty windows now gleamed. Shelves were full. The little bell above the door chimed often, welcoming customers who smiled a little more than before. But something was missing. Behind the counter, Mark had replaced the old faded clock with a photo in a plain wooden frame. It showed 2 men standing side by side, one in a shop apron, the other in a worn jacket and a shy smile. Mark and Daniel, strangers once, friends forever. One morning, as Mark was stocking a shelf, he noticed a letter slipped under the door. It was addressed to him in rough, familiar handwriting. He opened it slowly, heart pounding. "Dear Mark, I'm writing this from Dayton. I'm working in a local garage, small place, but honest work. My hands are covered in grease, but I smile every day. I see my daughter every weekend. She forgave me. She said I came back a better man, and I owe that to you. You gave me a chance when no one else would. Not just a job, a purpose, a reason to stand again. You looked at me and saw something I forgot. I had left Worth. I carry your kindness every day. I'll never forget what you did. Thank you for believing in me. Daniel." Mark folded the letter and placed it gently beside the photo. He didn't speak, but he didn't need to. A quiet, full smile spread across his face. That morning, as customers filled the little shop, Mark greeted each one with a little more light in his voice, because he knew, sometimes, saving someone else